라조다 홍원들야 아주지 잘람 균이 신신나겐게 파즈와 긴두긴데 좀
To begin with, I'd like to offer my greetings to the noble Sangha of monks and nuns who are listening over the internet, as well as the acharyas, khenpos, and geshes, all of the laymen and women. To all of you, I'd like to offer my warm greetings. Now, to continue where we left off the other day, the point where we've come to is, it is this. Here it is Here we've been speaking about the 5 points of the Bhikshu Mahadeva connected to the Second Council. So yesterday we spoke about the assertions of Tsukamoto Keisho. And so today what we'll discuss is the Korean Keta Lee Jarangs. And following that, we'll speak about a summary of the original split into schools. Now, when we speak about the position of Lee Jarang, the way she views it, she is a Korean Buddhist scholar, and in 1998, she published a paper titled A Reconsideration of the Cause of the Initial Schism in Buddhist Monasteries. So this is the paper that she published, within which she gave many opinions that many interests found very interesting and very enlightening. And so many researchers actually take interest in her work, and it's also frequently quoted. So next, I would like to share the most important positions of the scholar. So generally, within the texts of all of the Foundation Vehicle schools, it says that there ended up being two. It split into the Sthaviravada and the Masangaka schools, the two basic schools. And so these two basic schools, one is Sthaviravada, or the school of the elders, and the other is the Mahasangaka, or the school of the majority. And so in this respect, all the different schools agree on this. But in terms of the cause of the schism and the particularities, when they explain them, each of the different schools have their own particular. There's no agreement. So generally we talk about the Sthaviravada as being more conservative, as being more rigid. And we think of the Mahasangaka school as being more liberal, you could say, more relaxed. And so we could say that that's the more relaxed side. However, when the scholar Lee Jiarang examined the Mahasangaka Sutra, the questions of Shariputra, which I mentioned this the other day, and so this is probably a school, the Mahasangaka school. And so when she looked at this text, Lee Jiarang came to the opinion that the Mahasangaka school, in actuality, what they were was actually is that they objected to the Sthaviravada adding to the Vinaya, or adding more rules to more precepts to the trainings. For example, there's the group of multiple trainings. And so within these problems, they increased the number of trainings. And because they increased this, they objected to this. And they actually, the Mahasangaka, they wanted to preserve the old Vinaya, the Vinaya that had previously existed. They wanted to preserve and continue this. So this is the side that they took. And so if we look at it from one perspective, the Mahasangaka was in this way actually even more conservative than the Sthaviravada. The Sthaviravada wanted to change the Vinaya and increase and develop the Vinaya, whereas the Mahasangakas rejected it. And they said, we don't need to increase it. We need to, the old one is fine. So if we think about it from another perspective, the Mahasangaka school is actually more conservative than the Sthaviravada school. And so this is the situation, she says. Likewise, this Korean scholar, Lee Ja-rang, also cites the opinions of another scholar, and that opinion is that the greatest influence on the particulars of each school was actually the environmental differences between the East and the West. So what this means is that when we think about the East and the West, like during the Second Council, the bhikshus from the East and the bhikshus from the West, right? When we talk about the Eastern regions, or in areas like Vaishali. So these are Vaishali. And in the areas such as Vaishali and the Eastern regions, the Eastern regions were wealthier. They had better economies. And so the Sangha actually lived more comfortably. But in the Western regions, for example, the region of Mathura, and the economy was not as good. They were poorer. And so the Sangha also had greater difficulty with their lifestyle. And so the Sangha in those regions, in order to improve their life, the living conditions, they had to keep even stricter discipline. The reason for this is that the Western regions was a place where the Brahmanical traditions were very strict, and there were also many Jains. And within the Brahmanical, there were many who practiced austerities and difficulties and hardships. And so the bhikshus, if they did not keep strict Vinaya discipline, harder discipline, then they would not be able to fulfill the ideas or wishes of the people of that region. So in order to compete against the Jain and the Hindu sects, they also needed to make the Vinaya precepts even more fine and precise. For one example of this that Lee Ja-rang gives is that there's the training dharmas. When this is that comes of offenses, these are the minor offenses, and so one of them is called the trainings, the multiple trainings. And so the Vinayas of each of the different schools, there have actually been many trains. There are many differences between each schools. When I talk about the training dharmas, what it is there. Primarily what it is discussing are the rules for the daily behavior of the monks, such as how to wear their robes, how to carry and use their alms bowl, how to eat food, and in particular, how they should behave when they came into contact with the lay people. These are what these rules are primarily about. And so it's primarily talking about the external position, what people see. And so it's quite a bit about what is said here. And so when we think about these many different trainings, when you look at them and to think that actually there are great differences in the number of the trainings. For example, what Li Zhurang herself said is that they were added to them, that they were increased. I think if you look at this, you will see. First, I'll show you a table. I think it'll make it easier to see. So this is a table of the different numbers of trainings at the different schools. If you look at this, it's like it's the different numbers of trainings among the precepts. For example, in the Mahasangika Vinaya in the Chinese, there are 66. The Sanskrit manuscript of the Mahasangha school says 67. The Theravada tradition has 75 trainings. The Mahakashyapa school has 96. The Dharmaguptapa and the Mahishashika Vinaya have 100 trainings. The Chinese tradition of the Mahayana has a 97. The Tibetan tradition of the Mulasarvastivada has most foreign scholars say they're 108, but normally we talk about there being 112. And it's primarily differences in the almsas, so there's a way of dividing those into two. It's a question of whether you are dividing them or not. And then there's the Mulasarvastivada Sanskrit manuscript, which has 108. The Chinese Sarvastivada has 113, and the Sanskrit Sarvastivada has 113. So when we look at this, what we understand is that the fewest number of disciplines is in the Mahasangika Vinaya. There are 66 in the Chinese tradition and 67 in the Sanskrit manuscript. So there's 66 in Chinese and 67 they don't go beyond the 60s. And so the fewest the number of trainings are in the Mahasangika. And all of the other traditions have more. And the most is actually the Sarvastivadin. And see, they even have the Mulasarvastivada has a fair number itself. So the Mulasarvastivada and the Sarvastivada both have the most. And so for this reason, what this shows us is that there's a great variation in the numbers of trainings in the different schools. And so for that reason, what this shows is that the Staviravada schools, the Western regions, we talk about the Stiraviravada. At this time, it wasn't called the Staviravada. But later it was called by the name, after the original split into schools, it was called the Stavaravada school. But if we think, we can basically say that it's the Stavaravada schools. So the Sanghas in the Western regions, in accord with their time and place, they increased the number of the precepts as well as the number of different subpoints to keep in all of them. They increased all of these. The main aim for this was to make the Sangha a better example for people to see, and also to gain more support from the householders, to inspire faith in the householders. And so it's for this purpose, they made many new precepts and made the rules even stricter. Now the Mahasangika, those are in the Mahasangha Skad, what they did was they continued the precepts that were already there, the ones that there were the fewer precepts that were in the original Vinaya. They continued the original traditions, and those are more comfortable and a more relaxed discipline. They continued to practice it appropriately. So then basically, when we're talking about the original split into schools, According to the Korean scholar Lee Jarang, you cannot say you can say it was some incidental incident, such as the 10 points, the 5 points. It wasn't like some sort of, it wasn't like just a single cause that led to the split. Her thought is that actually, around the time, the beginning of the Second Council, the Mahayana, the Dharma spread through many regions of India, and as it spread the different regions each had their own culture, their own history, and they all had their own background. And because they have been different environments, and due to this, the sanghas in those different regions gradually changed quite a bit. And in the end, because of the different customs and the different particulars of each the region, there's basically no way to avoid the split of the Sangha into different schools. So this is her own position. And this is primarily the Western Sangha in the Western region, in order to gain more support from the lay people of those regions, made the diviners real stricter and made even more trainings and more specific trainings, whereas the Eastern Sangha, since they had very little difficulty with their livelihood, they continued to uphold the earlier traditions intact. And in the end, the two of them, because they had a different way of doing things, and because of the different ways of doing things, because of their environments, and they had different customs, and because of this, they eventually split. They originally became quite different, and they had to split into two different schools. And so, in addition, this Korean scholar Lee Jaranga also makes a request to scholars and encourages scholars to say that we need to re-examine the Mahasanghika school. The reason is that before this, most Mahasangha said that the Mahasangha was a more careless faction. The Theravadins were more careful. They kept the old traditions. They were more conservative. They preserved the old traditions, whereas the Mahasanghikas were careless and didn't preserve the old traditions and did whatever. And so that's what they normally recognize. But she says that's actually not correct. The Mahasanghika, if you look at their own text, the Mahasanghikas is actually is a school that upheld the original Vinay, the Vinay that had already existed, and because they preserved, and they said it's not that they weren't there, they were careless and did whatever they wished. Actually, they were the most conservative. They're the faction that preserved the old traditions, and so that's the side that they took. So this is the opinion of the Korean scholar Lee Jarang. Now, following this, I'd like to show you all something. So I'd like to give a summary of this. So to make a summary of the topic of the original split into schools, so here we have this. So this is discussing the summary and the views of most modern scholars. Now, as I spoke about before, I've explained the views of the Korean scholar Lee Jarang. The other day we spoke about the Japanese scholar Keishu Tsukamoto. And many speakers, and in particular most of the Japanese scholars, I thought I'd like to give their opinions. So what most of the Japanese scholars say, or what the way they see it, is that when you talk about the original split in there are many different accounts, there are many histories of this. They would say that it began because of the 10 points, that it occurred because of the 5 points. There are many different causes that people position, and so for the cause the split of the Sangha into two parts. So there are many accounts of this. But all of these accounts, the basis of these, when you look at what they all come down to, what they come down to is that within the Sangha, there are two discordant viewpoints. Because of this, and because of the two different viewpoints, and they persisted for a long period of time. It wasn't just a day or two, it wasn't just a year or two, but it actually persisted for many years that there were these different viewpoints. And it is because of this that it came to needing to split into two schools, that it becomes very clear that this is why. So what many modern scholars say about this is that they get with the term that they call for this, they say that there's like a conflict between the Vinaya holders and the Abhidharma holders. They say that it's okay to call it this. And generally, when we talk about a conflict between a Vinaya holder and the Abhidharma holders, it's not something that we actually say, but otherwise within our Tibetan Buddhism, often when you think about alcohol, for example, the Vinaya holders say, what they say is that alcohol is a naturally unwholesome act, whereas the Abhidharma people say that it is a disobedient unwholesome. So there's one discussion that occurs. And so this is how it is. The modern day scholars say that it's because there are two different viewpoints, different ways of viewing things, that there's the original split into schools. And if we give a name, we say a conflict between the Vinaya holders and the Abhidharma holders. They say that this is an appropriate way of describing it. So this is their opinion of this. So how did this happen? If we think about the 10 points, in terms of the conflict between the Vinaya holders and the Abhidharma holders, when you think about the 10 schools, when they talk about the Vaishali school or the Council of the 700, for example, when we look at within the minor topics in the Madhusudana, the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya talks about how the second council, but it doesn't speak about the original split in the school. So what does the main cause of the conflict come down to? It is that the Vinaya holders, what the Vinaya holders wanted, their primary causes, so that comes down to the Vinaya holders and the Abhidharma holders. And the reason why is that the Vinaya holders were very careful and very assiduous. They had a very conservative view. They wanted to keep the conservative view as they wanted to. And so they were the side that took the very conservative. They wanted to hold the Vinaya very strictly. And they would say that no one should be allowed to change the Vinaya. Likewise, they said that there shouldn't be, everything this is Vinaya is just very certain. And so it shouldn't be adapted into the time and place. It's just itself very definite and specific. And so when you think about the controversy of the 10 points, the people who said that the 10 points were impermissible, the people who criticized it were this side, the Vinaya holders. Now, when you think about the Abhidharma holders were a little bit more tolerant. They were the more tolerant position. And there is a little bit more progressive in their thought. And so they had a more progressive way of looking at it. In particular, they asserted that in some situations it was permissible to relax discipline. It's okay. They said that it's okay to relax the Vinaya. What they considered important was the essence of the Abhidharma. They didn't consider the words or the words and the explanations. So they said they look at after what the actual time and place. That what is most important is like the practical application, different place. And they just said that never changing it for all the time and place. They would never changing it due to time and place would not be all right. They said. So they basically said that you had to. They considered it appropriate to change the Vinaya discipline in accordance with time and place. And so within the 10-point controversy, they'd be the ones who'd be said that the 10 points would be more permissible, that they were appropriate, and that in the time and place they should be appropriate. This is what the position that they must have held. And so this is the explanation of the conflict between the Vinaya holders and the Abhidharma holders in terms of those two. And when you think about the 5 points, and if you think about how do the Abhidharma holders and the Vinaya holders discuss them, so basically it's actually very similar to the situation with the 10 points. The way the 5 points and the 10 points originated were similar, but the difference is that the 10 points primarily are looking at the Vinaya discipline. The 5 points are primarily concerned with philosophy or with doctrine. The reason is that the 5 points or the 5 views are primarily speaking about whether the arhatship is the ultimate state. It's saying that it's not the ultimate state, having the suspicion that it's not. And so it's this question of whether arhatship is the ultimate state or not. And that was the main conflict. When you have doubt in this level of arhatship, then the elders considered the arhatship, they considered this to be most important, the highest level. And so that is the level where the debate comes. And actually, where this controversy actually comes that it's questioning the status of the Vinaya holders. And the reason why is because the Vinaya holders were the ones who were elders. They called themselves elders and arhats, that seniority. And it's like saying, you're not so important. The main point is that that's what it's saying. Now, another way of looking at it is that if you're taking a more relaxed view and more broad view, and allowing for a more productive and a better understanding of this in terms of the view, that so it's like you can able to, and if you look at it from that perspective, then you have the wish, then you can actually criticize the elders, the Vinaya holders. So basically, when you're talking about being more relaxed with the 10 points, and when you're talking about the opinion that the 5 points, that the level of arhatship is not the ultimate thing, is actually very similar, because they're both talking about being more relaxed and holding this, the letting go of the old views and seeing that the rules need to be more appropriate to the time and place, not something where you don't change it. It's not like a rigid set of rules that you don't change in time and place. Instead, they had doubts or questions about that. And so they considered whether you should think carefully about that. So I think it shows that they actually have the thought more deeply. And so for that reason, the summary that the scholars say is that within the Sangha, that had been for a long time. There are different people who had different, more progressive or liberal factions, and this had been there for the previous time. For example, when you think about the council in Rajgir, this is the one that we call the Council of 500 Arhats, because there were 500 Arhats. So when you talk about the Rajgir Council, the first council, if we think about that, this is the time when Mahakashyapa criticized Ananda. And Mahakashyapa was a more conservative viewpoint. And Ananda was more liberal. And so that's very clear, right? Ananda requested the Buddha to ordain women, and so Ananda had a more liberal viewpoint. It's very clear. And Mahakashyapa, he didn't enter the Buddha Dharma until he had already become Buddha. Before that, he was a non-Buddhist. He had been a non-Buddhist Hindu for a long time. And so he had a more traditional view. And he also is this. One of the reason why Mahakashyapa was so famous was because he was the greatest at dwelling within the 12 qualities of training. These are actually like more aesthetic practices. At that time in India, they followed the old Shramana traditions of India, so they basically continued those traditions. So Mahakashyapa was like the more conservative position. And so when they had the council in Rajgir, the first council, there were the disagreements with Ananda. So there's that aspect right there. Then during the Vaishala, there is a debate over the 10 points, whether they're permissible or not. Likewise, we've talked about the debate over the 5 points. And all of these, they have different content, but in actuality, in all of them, they come down to between the Vinaya holders and the Abhidharma holders, or the Vinaya holders and the Dharma holders. It's like a bit of an opposition. So the question of a little bit of opposition between these two. So in the end, as the opposition between the Abhidharma and the Vinaya holders grew stronger and stronger, then there was no way could resolve this, and in the end they ended up having to split into the two schools. And so you had the Sthaviravada and the Mahasangika school. The Sthaviravada was primarily the people who held the traditions of the Vinaya holders. And the Mahasangika, you could say, maybe they upheld the traditions of the Dharma holders. And so in any case, there was the original split into two schools. So sometimes when we think about this, I think we think in this way. Perhaps you all should think about this. When you talk about the original split into two schools, from one perspective, it was not good because it split the original Buddha Sangha into two. It's actually something we should be kind of sad about. If our teacher, the Buddha, had been present at that time, then all of the students would have respected it. They'd all been together. But on the other hand, if the original schools had not split, when you think about the 18 federal schools, it's like they're all different flowers blooming. It's like that would have happened. Like there's this big great meadow of blooming flowers. And similarly, if these original schools had not split, then the Mahayana would have been very difficult for the Mahayana to develop. And if there were no Mahayana, then it would be very difficult for there to have been a secret mantra of Vajrayana. So if we think about it from one perspective, the original split of the schools and the Buddhism split into two, from one perspective, it's a bad incident. But on the other hand, because of that, then the teachings of Buddhism will have to change in different forms or to improve themselves in different ways. And so the teachings were there and able to spread in all directions. And so if we think about this, that actually, then you can think of the original split actually made the Sangha even better. So next what I would like to speak about is what I'd like to speak is the leadership of the Sangha, leadership of Buddhism after the parinirvana of the Buddha. So generally during this teachings, last year's teaching, I did speak about it briefly last year. I did speak about it in detail. So this year I'd like to speak about it a little bit in more detail. I think I would like to speak about the transmission of the teachings after the Buddha. And so in order to speak about this, you think about the leadership of the Buddhist Sangha, or the leadership of Buddhism after the parinirvana. And during the time when our teacher, the Shakyamuni Buddha, the undisputed and universally renowned leader of the Sangha, was, of course, our teacher, the Shakyamuni Buddha. And because the time he founded Buddhism, he was the leader. That's what we always say. It's like it's impossible for with a single teachings to have two teachers. It's like he had no rival. Now, in the latter part of his life, when he already came to be elderly, and he was at an advanced age, the daily management of the Sangha community was primarily handled by Shariputra and Moggallana, as it's said in the scriptures. However, Shariputra and Moggallana were primarily having assistance as his principal distance, but they didn't actually give actual leadership of the Sangha. It's the teacher, the Buddha, who maintained being the leader. Now, at that time, for a while, there was the time when Devadatta attempted to act as a substitute for Shariputra and Moggallana, and tried to become a leader of the Sangha. And he asked the Buddha if he could, and the Buddha actually reprimanded him severely. And after he reprimanded him severely, then Devadatta got very angry and he got jealous. And he then established his own separate Sangha community. And so this is what we call the schism in the Sangha. This is what we call the schism in the Sangha. And he did various different things. But in terms of he was unable to rival the Buddha in terms of being the leader of the scripture. He was not able to actually say that he tried to rival him, but he competed against him. But because the king is like the level of the king of Dharma, there's no way he could actually oppose him. Now, after the Buddha's parinirvana, when you think about the leadership of the Buddhist Sangha, or who'd be the leader of all Buddhists, if you ask who was that, you ask who, who are the main people who continue to preserve and maintain and spread the Buddhist teachings? There are actually many different historical accounts. There are primarily three different explanations. There's the explanation of the northern tradition, the explanation of the Tibetan transmission, and the explanation of the southern transmission. So what I'd like to explain is that when we talk about we often talk of the northern transmission, then primarily, if we talk about it in a broader level, that the Tibetan transmission is sort of included within that. But if you look at it more in detail, the northern tradition, the Tibetan tradition are actually a bit different. The reason for that is that the Tibetan tradition came from mostly came directly from India to Tibet. It spread directly, and for that reason, the Tibetan transmission is a little bit separate. And so today, when I speak about the northern tradition, the Tibetan tradition, the southern tradition, let's speak about the descriptions of the succession of the teachings among all of these schools. So the first of these is the tradition of the northern transmission Buddhism. So when you think about the way it's described in the northern transmission, So if we talk about it from the perspective of the northern transition of Buddhism,
나서 다들 제래 담보디에네
so the here we have the first we have
템베데르기 남다르세르 와
the Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma.
이요 요거죠 요거
It's all going very quickly.
템베데르기 남다르세르 니바데 냥에
So we have the main text to this, the Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma. Then we have the Ashoka Avadana, and the third is that we have the ways it's described in the various Vinaya scriptures. So these are the three main topics we have to speak about. And the first of these is the description according to the Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma. So this text, the Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma, it's the title of a text. The Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma. And so this is translated during the Northern Wei dynasty by Jie Jiaye, who was, and others. So this is the Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma. So in Chinese, it's called the Fu Fa Can Yin Yuan Chuan. So if we translate it into English easily, the Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma. Now, what it says is that after the Buddha passed into nirvana, it speaks about how the leaders of the Buddha Sangha, of Buddhism after that. Now, Buddhist leaders, if we think about these days, we have you have a vote or elections for that. Is that how the leaders were selected? And that's not how it happened. When you talk about the transmission of the Dharma, it was passed from one individual to another. They were given by one. The previous leader would hand it over, give it over to the next leader. And so it's not just that the giving of the leadership, but also giving the entrustment of the responsibility to protect man and propagate the teachings. So it's a very this is you have to see. They had to examine the person, see if there's the right courage, and whether bodhicitta and the right aspirations to do this. So if we look at this text, the Chronicles of Transmission, that was translated into Chinese, if you ask, it's actually very clear about who was there. And when they say how many people there are, it says that there are 24 generations. So it's 24 generations. I think it's good to show you this. I've made a table here. If I only say it orally, you won't understand it. So this is here. This table has actually two tables. It has the Chronicles of the Transmission, and then there's also the Chan tradition. We're thinking first about the Chronicles tradition. If you only pay attention to that. And so this Chronicles of the Transmission, what it has, the first one, we aren't considering the Buddha. We're counting starting from Mahakashyapa. The second is Ananda, the third is Shanavasi, and the third is Upagupta. The fourth is Chittaka. This is Vibhaga. The seventh is Buddhanandi. And then after that is the eighth is Buddhamitra. The ninth is Gelonzip. And so from there, many of them all. That is, the 11th is Take, or is Avagosha. And the 13th is Nagarjuna. The 14th is Aryadeva. So many of them, right? So within the figure in the 7 generations we count, there are many great individuals whose names appear. As in addition, there are also many people who are very well known, such as Nagarjuna, Anudevara, and likewise also Ashvagosha. Ashvagosha. Their names also appear here. So in brief, the 24 generations, 24 leaders of the teaching. The last of them, the Simha, the 24th is Simha. So this is the Bhikshu Simha. He has this name, Bhikshu Simha. He was the last of the member of this lineage. At that time, he was in the region of Kashmir that time. There was a king in that region, and he became very hostile to Buddhism, and he persecuted the Sangha. And in the end, even Mahanda Matsingha, the elder who led the teachings, was also killed. Because of that, the transmission lineage was forced to cease. And so to that point, there actually the lineage continued up to that point, but when the Bhikshu Sangha was killed by Mirakula, then the transmission lineage was broken. But many contemporary researchers say that this Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma in Chinese, it gives 24, but it says that if they ask, do they all happen exactly as described in here, all 24? They say they can't all. Actually, they give three main reasons for this. And the first reason for this is that this Chinese text, the translation, the Chronicles of the Transmission of Dharma, has six fascicles. And it was translated by, was not actually a Chinese person, but actually someone who came from abroad. He possibly was Indian, perhaps he was another nationality, but at any rate, he was actually a Tibetic elder from the western region, Ji Jia Ye, and as well as someone in Tan Yao, and these two translated it together. It said that they translated together, but the actual point, the way it actually was, is that there was someone named Ji, not Jie Jia Ye. Actually took to the so it is actually based on an old translation by Tan Yao and made a new thing. But when it was translation, it looks like there's many obvious traces of it being compiled. And when we say by being compiled or being a compilation, so that it's not actually a faithful translation of a single original translation, but actually had many different sources, many different meanings that it kind of selected from there, taking the best parts from each and taking some from one, take the good parts from another. It's because you got to take the best parts and put them all together, chose them and compiled them all, and they put them all together and created this this account. That's one reason. Now, second reason is actually another one that I think there's a lot to understand here. The second reason is that after more than a century after the Buddha's parinirvana, the Sangha actually remained unified for about 110 years, or so 100 years and a few decades. So at that time, the transmission of lineage at that point was like the leader of the whole. It was like the leader of Buddhism as in a unified Buddhism. But after it split into two schools, the Buddhism split into different parts, and it would be very difficult for them to have been a single leader, respected by all. The Buddha Sangha was split into two, and so they each would have their own leader. The Mahasangha would have their own. The native would have their own Theravada one. It would be very difficult for there to be like a single leader respected by both. If you have to pick one, they're respected by both, and because they've already broken into two schools for that reason, and this is also not reasonable. Now, the third reason, in this Chronicles of the Transmission of the Dharma, there are many later prominent Mahayana masters such as Ashwagosha and Nagarjuna and Ashwagosha, and Aryadeva, and they were all added to the transition lineage. This is kind of like fitting square peg to a round hole. It's like at that point, it's primarily talking about the transmission of the foundation vehicle skills. And if you then insert the Mahayana master into that, it's kind of strange. Likewise, the foundation vehicle schools would not accept that Nagarjuna and Aryadeva and Ashwagosha would have been the leaders. And so for that reason, what many researchers say, if you think about this, the Chronicles of the Transition of Dharma, it was actually more like a set of biographies of how the great beings of the past protected the teachings. It's a more reasonable translation of the title. Now, the reason for the reason why there's such an account had to be made is because they had to demonstrate the Sarvastivada school and the Mahayana Buddhism have a authoritative lineage, something they could show that they have a valid lineage, an authoritative lineage. And so this is why this text, or these, why this text would have been prepared. No, I think that this is actually a good place to leave it tonight.